Hey, HCDA, and this is my guide on the aspects faction of Endless Legend 2. These are the diplomats of the game, which doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be nice to everyone, but you are going to force everyone to do what you want. Not only does this faction have a very nice aesthetics, they are also going to make the entire map look pretty by spawning the coral that you kind of see growing all over the place. It's the purple stuff all over the map. If I zoom out a little bit, you can see I have coral growing everywhere, and that is because this entire faction is built around this one mechanic. Let's start with the basics. You spread this coral all over the map by building coral growers. You can build those with your military units. It just costs a little bit of gold. And as soon as you build one of these, the coral will start spreading. It initially starts out around the thing that you built, but it will start spreading outwards from that automatically. That continues to happen even if you upgrade it to, for example, a camp over here, or if you upgrade that camp into a city or attach it to a city. Again, this will just keep growing and growing all over the place. It doesn't limit itself to the zone that you build it in either. As you can see, it's spreading outside of my own zones over here as well. That coral is going to do a lot of things for you. First and foremost, your basic units are pretty slow, but if they move across coral, they're going to be a lot faster. So you can see, for example, I have 3 movement on this army, but as long as I'm moving across coral, I can move a lot further than just that. Coral doesn't just spread itself randomly, it is actually going to prioritize water as well as rivers. So you can see over here, there's a lot of this coral already in the water, but especially the rivers that it prioritizes are very convenient because it will act like a bridge for your units. But the coral has so many more uses beyond that. For example, the coral will also prioritize spreading towards minor faction villages over here. You can see, for example, there's a village that is currently hostile to me, but if I pass the turn, the coral will be spreading towards that village. And voila, it is now a non-hostile village. You can see I already have converted 2 out of 3 villages in this region, and the next one is soon to follow. Other than making your units move faster and pacifying villages, there's another use for the coral in your own zones, because in the 3rd era you get a Hall of Harmony building that you can build in each of your cities, and that is going to give you 1 influence on every single coral in your city territories, which should be pretty much every single tile you're working with. So it's very easy to make this give every city plus 20 or even more influence, and that is going to add up really fast. However, you might be wondering, turning the entire map pink and all is nice, but how does that relate at all to diplomacy? Now, what you really want to do is actually turn the map pink in the area of your enemies as well, because that is going to allow you several nice advantages. Pretty early on, you're going to get access to a faction-specific technology called Persuasion. This is going to do 2 things for you. If you build the consular mission building, you are going to have a lot less influence cost on treaties. Now, that by itself is already nice, but the fact that you also get the Force a Treaty capacity allows you to literally force your enemies into whatever treaty you want. And this is going to be reduced in cost if you have coral tiles in their empire. So the more coral you spread across the entire world, the more you can bend your enemies to your will. Of course, it's nice and all to be able to make your enemies less aggressive towards you or have them share their research with you, but where it's really starting to get interesting is when you start having a lot of that coral in their territory, because then you can share the coral exploitation with them, and that is going to give you additional dust and influence based on how many coral tiles they are actually exploiting. Now, as you can see, this is just an example from one of my own games. I am getting 42 dust and 42 influence just by the fact that there's a lot of coral in their territories. And if all that wasn't enough yet, there's another benefit of spreading coral all over the entire world, because as you can see, I can actually see what is going on in this area of the map, even though I don't have any units here. Yes, I do have a coral grower in here, but you actually get line of sight from the coral itself. So even though I don't have any units anywhere over here, I can still see exactly what's going on and keep the tabs on my enemies that way. Long story short, when it comes to coral, you want to spread it all over the place, but you do want to be a little bit specific about where you place your coral growers, because remember, you are going to want to turn a lot of these into city extensions, and therefore you want to place them in locations that give you a lot of benefit, but also take into account that the coral will be growing towards water, towards villages, and towards the enemy territory. So yeah, depending of course on where you place that, that is going to take a long time, or it can be really quick, so you kind of need to balance that out. Luckily, coral is not the only thing that makes the aspects good. There's a secondary focus that they have, and that is on minor factions. The aspects have several faction-specific technologies that allow you to pick up additional protectorate slots, which means that near the end of the game you can very easily end up with a total of 6 of these protectorates within your empire. And to make that even better, it doesn't actually even cost you anything to assimilate them into your empire. You can just do that, and if you want to revoke that and then put in something else, you can do that as easily as well. So you can really switch up these bonuses depending on what you need in the moment. Outside of just getting a lot of bonuses from all of those minor factions in your empire, and of course the population that they add to your empire as well, you can leverage them even further by picking the correct counselors. For example, I really like picking Polymethon the Steadfast very early on as one of my counselors, because he gives you a 10% influence income per protectorate on your empire. This is very quickly going to add up to at least 20 or 30 influence per turn, and while that might not sound like a lot, in that stage of the game it might be as much as some of the other factions are producing in total, and this is just going to go on top of what you're already producing. In addition, you also have access to Ictarius the Seeker, and this guy is going to give you plus 10 signs, not just per protectorate, but per pacified village among those protectorates. So if you have 10 or 15 villages, this is going to add up to over 100 signs per turn, and honestly I think I probably at this stage in the game, let me check, I actually have a lot more than that. Let me see here. Yeah, so Ictarius the Seeker, this is somewhere in the mid game for me, is producing 150 signs per turn in total, which you can see is a third of my total signs production. Obviously, all of this means that you really want as much influence as possible so you can expand your own territories, get all of that coral going, and also use that influence towards making your enemies do what you want. And there's a couple of ways other than the coral methods that I already mentioned in order to get that influence going. For example, by default, your own aspect population have a bonus that is going to give them a +1 influence per population type in the same category. So what that means is that, as you can see over here, I have a Black Hammer population as well as an aspect population, and that means that there's 2 different types of population in this particular section, and that means that I get a 3+1 production. Now if I would move a aspect population to over here, so now there's no other populations in this section, I no longer get that bonus. Now if you really want to make the most out of that, what you could do is of course say, well, I am going to add in different populations, and you can either start producing the other minor factions that you have within your empire in your city to kind of maximize the total output you get from that. However, I don't recommend overdoing this, because your own aspect population, if you have at least 10 of them within your empire, which will pretty quickly happen, will already get a +1 influence themselves as well. So of course the other minor factions do not get that bonus, so you might want to be careful about overproducing those specific types of populations. If you leverage all of those abilities that I just mentioned in the correct way, you are going to get a massive amount of influence flowing in per turn. This will allow you to expand even further across the map, but it's also going to allow you to pick up some bonuses along the way that other empires will not get if you're quick enough. For example, there are the deeds, and Bringer of Comfort is an ability that requires you to have 20 foundations in a single city, and because you're producing so much influence anyway, that is probably one you should be able to pick up first fairly easily, and this is going to allow you to just place your populations wherever you need them to go in your city. Another one that is probably even easier to pick up is Bringer of Metropolises. This requires you to build 3 cities, be the first empire to do that anyway, and that is going to increase your city cap by 1. So that allows you to build a 4th city. Now if you have 4 cities before the other enemies have 2 or 3, there is no way in which you're going to lose the game anymore after that. Last but not least, Bringer of Unity is also something you can really focus on, because this is going to require you to have 15 territories. And again, because you have so much influence coming in, you should be able to grab 15 territories the old-fashioned way, just by building those coral growers and turning them into camps. There is another good reason why you might want to get all of those protectorates going, because honestly the military units that this faction gets by itself are just a little bit on the weak side. You have the envoys, which are mostly just scouts, but they're not really good at that either, so all in all they're not that much use in the battlefield. The sentries are a range unit which are okay, but nothing to write home about in particular. And then you have the warsmith, which honestly is a pretty good unit, but it just doesn't have enough support from everything else, so you're going to be lacking in the military department in general. Even the elite unit of this faction, the Crusher itself, is just a little bit underwhelming. It has a fair amount of HP, it does do a fair amount of damage as well, but the only skills it gets initially are defensive skills, and, well, dying slower is not actually going to help you a lot defeating your enemy, because this game is pretty much just about taking out units as fast as possible. Which means that in the military department, what you want to do is just build enough units to keep your territory safe, and that is probably going to be just a couple of armies roaming the map. The most important defense that you have is just forcing your enemies into military agreements like non-aggression pacts or even military pacts, so that they are just not going to be attacking you to begin with. Of course, you do still need a couple of armies to take care of some of the minor factions around the world, but again, you can do that with your coral as well if you are a little bit conscious about where you place those things down. When it comes to actually winning the game, the most logical way to do so with this particular faction is through the Impress route, and then specifically through the stature win condition. This requires you to raise the public opinion of 7 empires to a minimum of 80. The number that you're looking for, if you're wondering what your current relationship level actually is when you go to the diplomacy screen over here, you can see what your enemy thinks of you, and this number is your public relations with them. You might be wondering at this point, well, if I need to convince 7 empires to like me, how am I going to do that if I play a game that has less than 7 empires? The solution to that question is, again, the minor factions, because every protectorate that you have under you counts as an empire as well, because you can actually add 6 of those in total to your own empire. You only need to convince one single enemy to like you a lot, and that should be doable if you spread enough coral to their territories, because that coral is also going to gain you reputation with that faction. So as you can see over here, I have 6 minor factions in my empire just by adding them, and it's completely free, etc. Just need to unlock the technologies to do that, and of course having a large enough empire to actually have 6 factions within your borders. But other than that, there's only a single enemy that really likes me, and the only reason that guy actually likes me, or that girl I should say in this case, is that I have a massive amount of coral in per territory. If for whatever reason you do need a plan B, then going for the Supremacy Master victory condition is probably the way to go. This requires you to have 20 territories, and because you have all the influence in the world that you're ever going to need while playing this particular faction, you should be able to do that, of course assuming that the enemies is not just going to box you in and limit your expansion rate. But as long as you have the room to expand, then this is definitely a secondary way to go for your victory as well. So to summarize, this is not necessarily an easy faction to play, but it is really rewarding once you get yourself going. You want to focus on spreading your coral as early and as quickly as possible. Make sure that you put your coral growers either near pacified villages or villages that you need to pacify, or near your enemies' lines so you can make friends with them and get more benefits out of them. And if you have all of that done, make sure you start focusing on getting as many of those minor factions into your territory as well to leverage your powers even further. Don't try to do too much combat with this faction, because that is just putting everything on hard mode for no apparent reason, and you should be sailing your way towards a diplomatic victory very easily and very quickly. If a diplomatic victory is not your thing, you might want to check out my guide on the necrophages, which is the complete opposite of this faction. And I will be making more guides as well. Make sure you like this one if you found it at all useful, and subscribe to the channel for more guides and content. If you're still here, you are awesome, and I do hope to catch you in the next one.